If God Smuggler was the PG look into what Christian persecution looks like, then Tortured for Christ by Richard Wurmbrand is a window peeking into what is meant when it's said that they will hate you for his name. Wurmbrand was an atheist turned a Lutheran priest, and he lived under both Nazi occupation and communist rule. He started an underground church whenever communism really came to take effect in Romania, and for all of his troubles, he was imprisoned for 14 years in two different communist prisons until his freedom was purchased, not negotiated. He wasn't freed, he was purchased. And there are a wide variety of things to take from this, not least of which is exactly what I said just a minute ago, is that this is what is meant, a window truly peeking into, just a peek at the very fringes of what is meant by they will hate you for his name. Whenever the people that hate God are just onesies and twosies, it's one thing. You can identify people that hate God usually pretty easily, but whenever these people come into power, they will do atrocious things. They tortured these people for days, months, years at a time, destroying families, just annihilating families, not for any criminal organization, not because they were leading revolutions, not because they attempted assassinations on various political figures or anything, but simply because they wanted to torture the Christ out of them. And I took a couple of notes because I'm trying to think in a more organized fashion about these things, and that's kind of why I'm here. The first note that I took was on page 14. He recounts being in a communist parliament whenever they were starting to have to proclaim party loyalty publicly. They had to. They couldn't just be men of Christ. The clergy in the parliament couldn't just be men of God. They had to claim allegiance to the party, and not just say that they were good communists, not just say that their president was a good guy, but some of them were they were actively turning the church against God. One of them chose no longer to be called by his name, no longer to be called by his title, but rather Comrade Bishop. There were other ones that very notably claimed and was affirmed by the others among him that Moses gave the first commandment in their words, that Christ gave the second testament, rather the first testament, then the second testament. And then they said that Stalin, Joseph Stalin, gave the third testament that nullifies, that supersedes the other two. This is the level of affirmation and the level of commitment to the party that they had to, not simply that they had to do in order to save their lives, but that they actually truly believed very, very often. And it's not just things that they did with words, it's things that they did. They weren't just saying this to save their church. They were actively turning over their people and their congregants to the secret police, to the communist police, I can't remember what the police were called, what this police was called in Romania, but basically the KGB or the FSB. They were turning their own people over to those guys and sending them into prison so that they would usually never be seen again. And the bit that I took from this is man is fallible and very weak. We are not Christ. We're very, very far from Christ, of course, and naturally, but I'll just read it as I wrote it. Be always watchful of the very people you're meant to trust, turning themselves over to the den of vipers. Modern, lesser examples are the gay churches, COVID lockdowns, the apostles of false churches that we see here in America, and certainly throughout the West as well, and prosperity gospel. The examples that I gave of gay churches and the subversion of Western and American churches is not... I don't want to say that it's not nearly as bad, but it's not nearly as overtly and directly oppressive and violent. They're all removed from Christ. They all kicked God out of their church a long time ago. The communists and the gay churches and all of these things. But you need to be mindful. You need to be very watchful of whether it's the slick subversion that we see here in America or the overt Stalin gave us the third testament type of subversion that they saw in these communist states, and understand what that means for your church and what that might mean for you here while we're in our earthly presence. Also, understanding that following Christ may require extreme hardship in unimaginable circumstances. I cannot imagine being a Christian in Syria, being a Christian in China, being a Christian in the Soviet bloc, and being confronted with what it would mean for you to actually affirm your faith in Jesus Christ. Because in most cases, that means imprisonment. And I would say in nearly all cases, it means imprisonment. And in many, many cases, it means certain death. Be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove, knowing that they will hate you for his name. But even in this type of subversion and this type of persecution, Wurmbrand and various other pastors and leaders and church leaders in these countries were still doing everything that they could to hold church, to preach the word, and to be faithful to God and his commandments. So on page 25, he uses one example that I found from the book is on page 25. He uses watches as an excuse to evangelize because watches were very valuable, and they would have these watches to go and try to. I think they were selling them to Romanian soldiers. Or trying to do some type of trade, or at least that was the front. And I'm sure they did some watch trading, but there were a lot of Christians there that still wanted to believe, but they knew what it meant, that they, like policemen and soldiers, I think this one was at a military barracks, they knew Christ and they never let that go, but they also understood what it meant, as I just mentioned, and what I said about being a Christian in Syria or China, for example. They knew what it would have meant to publicly affirm, to stand against the party in proclaiming Christ, in not denouncing Christ. Unfortunately, a lot of these men did deny Christ, even though they kept him in their hearts. They did deny him outwardly, which is a terrible thing. It's understandable as a human, but it is still an objectively terrible thing. We're explicitly told not to do that. But back to the example that was on page 25, using these watches as a cover, he would use that as a chance to go and just sit and gather a crowd and to mitigate suspicion, because he could just say, nope, I have these watches, I'm here to talk watches. And then as soon as like a suspicious guard would walk off, then he would go back to preaching and having some sort of, I don't want to say Bible study, because it was very like, hey, I might only have 30 seconds, so here's the next bit of scripture that I can give to you. But they were using these things as covers. And of course, it didn't always work, but they were crafty in finding ways to still preach the word as they're meant to. On page 38 and 39, I actually want to read this because it is pretty, I don't want to say prescriptive, but it's pretty complete into how communists are. He says, the communists are impolite. They enter by violence into our hearts and minds. They force us to listen to them from morning to late into the night. They do it through their schools, radio, newspapers, posters, movies, atheistic meetings, and everywhere we turn. We have to listen continuously to their godless propaganda, whether we like it or not. Jesus respects our freedom. He gently knocks at the door of our heart, which I think very perfectly sums up how things are going today and how they have gone for certainly throughout a lot of history, but at least in this example specifically that I'm talking about here, it's the Soviet bloc. God gave us free will, and he certainly respects that. We are free to accept or deny him and his son as we wish. Of course, I hope and I pray that all of you have found Jesus Christ, but whether you have or not, communists, Marxists, socialists, whatever you want to call them, the people that seek to subvert your will so that you serve them will do it by any and every means necessary. And whatever they don't have available to them, they will make it. They will work tirelessly, as they have for decades and decades in our country and in other Western countries around the world, and as they've already succeeded in countries in the West and other parts of the world as well. They will work tirelessly to take a hold of every single institution, whether it's religion, whether it's political, whether it's media, it doesn't matter. They want that power so that you not only serve them, but submit by force, by will. They will coerce, they'll do whatever they want. They'll do whatever they have to exact their will, to impose their will on you. And that is exactly what happened in Romania. This is exactly what happened in Russia, in Ukraine. It's happening all over the place today, as it has happened in the past. And I think that very adequately sums up how this whole thing goes. Those who wish to rip you from God will often do so by force and coercion, as though there is no escape. It is then that you must be most ardent in your faith. I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been to remain faithful to Christ, not just as a regular peasant walking around trying to just, scrounge together enough food, because he does go into detail in this book about how they would plaster a propaganda that the state will provide for the crops. The state would come and seize the farms. They would ruin the crops, and then they would rip down that propaganda, post it back up, and say, "Hey, don't worry, it was great. We have the food." And they would just, of course, as communist regimes do, and certainly governments elsewhere do. That's not lost on me. We're talking about communism here. They lied. So in this time of extreme poverty, famine, actual oppression, and just suppression of any and every bit of speech and will and thought that was not directly and overtly committed to the state, I cannot imagine that just that level of hardship and adversity on a human level, but also on a physical level, but also on a spiritual level, remaining faithful to God. Like, I know now, because I'm in my I'm in a nice truck somewhere in America. I've got a comfy Western life. It's great. Life is good. Life is really, really good to me. And that sounds like hell on earth, absolute hell on earth. So just remaining faithful to that, because of course, naturally, I think there were a lot of people that lost faith because they were wondering just, where is God? Because communism was everywhere. The state was everywhere. There was no escape from it. It was it was ubiquitous. Not to labor on that point for too much. Way later on, because I didn't want to take too many notes, because this book is I cannot recommend this book strongly enough. It is so incredibly well worth the read. 109, that's a sign to myself to read it. In what words can we express the tragedy of Christian martyrs who, coming home after years in prison, are received with scorn by their children, who in the meantime have become militant atheists? I think we're seeing I'll read my note, because I expanded on this for posterity. So I'll read my note, and then if I need to add to it, I will. This paragraph sums up concisely a primer of what it means that they will hate you. It's not just words or money problems or something across the world. It's when they jail you, take your wife as property, and subvert your children. Sometimes they're overt, as in communism. Others covert, as in Western liberal democracies. And some specific examples on that last part, I think specifically of what's happening in a lot of public schools and what's happening with gender affirming laws in various states like Washington and California. There's there's not a unique case, but a specific case out of Washington where there was a guy who, his daughter was being told for years that she was stuck in the wrong body, and he was saying, no, you're not. She went and told the school, and then the school filed a report. I might be getting the state wrong, so forgive me if I'm fudging some of that details, but I know that the facts of the matter happened where child was being told something wrong about gender. Father was saying, no, God made you as you are, more or less. School found out, went to the state, and the state was pursuing the father for abusing the child, for telling the child, no, you really are a girl, and that's okay. And he was thrown in jail, had custody removed from his kid, and now the mother who's bought into it, the mother who affirmed what the state believes, has custody of this child who is stuck in this ubiquitous system, and likely hates her father. The mother hates the father. The state is actively pursuing the father as a criminal for his wrongthink. So all that to say, sometimes it's covert because we don't see it, because it's not in our face, whether you're in, maybe North Dakota or Florida or like Texas, for example. Like, it's happening well away from you, so you don't see it. Other times it is truly overt, whereas I was yapping on about for a while, it was everywhere in Romania. It was everywhere in Russia, in Belarus, and all these other places too. And it is truly like they attack the family unit. It's not just that they hate you for his name. It's not just that they hate you. It really does come down to, they want you to be their property. They want you to be vassals of the state, of their will, of the will of some other man, some other being that is them. And they will do anything to achieve that means. Well, later on page 128, this is my last note. And again, I took this as a read it dummy. So let me flip to that page. So this is just a point of clarification that I wanted to make, because I am but a mere layman, and this is my understanding. But there's one, he expands on other things outside of his persecution and outside of his torture and torment, because he does go into great detail about some of the torture and some of the torment that was put upon him and the many, many other prisoners. Things such as being put in an ice box right up until the point of death, taken out, warmed up, thrown right back in, and that's your life for weeks on end. You're standing for weeks on end. You have no food. You have no water. They would bring people's children in. 14. There's one example. He says one of the pastors or fathers was told to renounce Christ. They brought his 14-year-old son and beat him to death because he would not renounce Christ. They gave him chance and chance again, and the boy said, nope. Apparently the boy said, no, don't renounce Christ. I don't want to have a father as a coward. So the father didn't renounce Christ, and then they beat his son to death in front of him. Other times where they would crucify Christians and leave them on the floor in an overpopulated cage with no way for these prisoners to relieve themselves. So then they would have to, on crucified prisoners laid on the floor, as they're still alive, mind you. Other times where they would coerce, because of course these pastors and priests didn't have to. They could have said no to man, and they should have. But again, the overwhelming state of torture and torment, I understand why a human would submit to this. Coerced into giving human waste as the Eucharist, and just on a routine basis. And it's unthinkable. I think it's unthinkable until you read it. And of course, it's like they were doing things truly unimaginable to me, because I'm not an animal like that. And I think you're not either. But it's not all about the torture and torment that he and many other people endured. He talks about Saint Bernard, who was a monk high up in the mountains, but he heard about the foolishness of the Crusades. He's giving a historic example about Christians killing Arabs and Jews and their brethren in faith of another confession to an empty tomb. He left his monastery and stepped down from his heights to preach against the Crusades. I think I initially misread this, because brethren in faith of another confession, I think what was meant there, looking back at it, was the difference between Protestant denominations, of another confession between Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist, and things like that. Not in the sense of he's equating Arab, that he's equating Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. I don't think he was actually making that. That's how I read it initially. To win an empty tomb, I'm not sure what that means. I think what he's saying there is it was a whole godless endeavor. I feel it must be said, Arabs and Jews are not brothers in faith between themselves, nor with us as Christians. And unspeakable violence against Christians precipitated the Crusades. If you look into the history of the Crusades, it was this is an aside truly from the matter of the book, but he brought up the point, and I want to address my thoughts on it because it's my video and I can do that. There was gross, rampant violence, physical and sexual, against men, women, and children that went on for years and years and years in Western Christendom. Most of Europe was taken over under Islamic rule, and at least before there were a series of crusades. Unfathomable violence was happening on a routine basis for a lengthy, extended period of time before the first crusade ever happened. So I find it hard to consider it foolish crusades or senseless violence or anything like that. Violence between Christians did happen, and in my view, was the real and only major drawback of the Crusades. I'm sure that there were a lot of crusaders that got carried away in the violence, carried away in vengeance, and I pray that they were all held to repent for that. But still, there's one or two other things that I recall that I was like, I don't think that's right. But again, I didn't want to hamper this down. I'm already at about 20 minutes, so I didn't want to hamper this down too much. I think that this is so unimaginably well worth the read. It should, like, whether you're a Christian or not, this is what persecution looks like. This is what overt, mass, organized persecution at a continental level looks like. And the people that perpetrated this, not all of them are punished. I think very few of them are punished. And in effect, a lot of them are still in power around the world today. Some of them in the various states that they were in this book, in the not so distant history of the 20th century, because it really was very, very recent that this was happening. And of course, around the world, this is still happening today. The persecution of Christians is one of the most overlooked and underreported and underappreciated things that happened throughout history, and especially that is still happening today. And this is a heart-wrenching look into what that tends to look like. And I hope that you got something from this. If you did, let me know down below. I have a series of other books that I have read that I've gotten some notes on, other ones that, like, my bookshelf is full of stuff that I need to read. Let me know what you would like for me to read next, though. If there's a different ideology, some part of theology or something, nothing is really off limits. I have plans to read and review quite a wide variety of things, from Christian persecution and fascism, as I have, to communism and sexual ideology and Islamism and various other things. So let me know if you think I'm missing something or what you would like to see thrown on there, whether it's next or not. Especially if you made it this far, thank you so very, very much for watching this video. I hope you do the algorithm stuff. If you want to support me more directly, don't just give me money. I'm not a beggar. I write books. I have a link to my page on Amazon, so you can find that there too. Again, thank you so very much. I really hope you got something from this, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.